Doesn't work for me.
Okay, let's begin. We are on, I believe, 20B2, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, if I see it, I'll know.
Yeah,
Nathan?
that's where we are.
Because we
20B2.
we're up to the secondary relation.
Yes.
Kishem.
I heard it on the class.
Ukishem. Shemit Abel, says the Gemara. And just as a person has an obligation to be mit'abel on the deoraitas and on the derabanans, which we added, kach mit'abel al shiniyim shelahem. Also, a person should sit shiva for those that are secondary to the primaries. So in other words, one would imagine that means a son's son or a person's father's father, right? So the primary that person, the connection is the immediate relative. The secondary relative is the relative who's related to them. That's what Rabbi Akiva says. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, "Enu mitabel ela al ben beno ve'al avi aviv." Only on his son's son or on his father's father. So in other words, his grandson or his grandfather. Rabbi Akiva seemingly said, for all of the secondary relations, right, of all of the immediate connections. Chachamim say, Kol shemit'abel alav, mit'abel imo. Anyone that you would sit shiva for, right, for them, then if they're in shiva, mit'abel imo, you also sit shiva with them. Okay? Ask the Gemara, in other words, right, whoever's an immediate relation, if they have someone that they would sit shiva for, so someone you would sit shiva for, you sit shiva when they're sitting shiva,
Right.
which is basically
Your nephew,
no, wait, not nephew, which is basically a secondary.
Oh, okay.
Ask the Gemara, immediate, obvious question.
Secondary.
Yeah,
That's what you just said.
You go forever.
What do you mean?
The father's father
Yeah.
is the grandfather.
Correct. That's it. That's secondary.
That's it.
Right. But what
So it
if your
doesn't go forever.
grandfather's sitting for his father?
Who does that? That's a secondary to a triple. No, it doesn't say that. Okay? So Rabbi
sitting for?
Akiva said secondary. The second opinion, Rabbi Shimon, right? The middle opinion said Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. He said only on son's son or father's father. Okay? So someone who is like a direct for you. So it's also daughter or mother. But in other words, my mother's mother, Barmenan, or my father's father, my son's son, or my daughter's daughter.
Right.
Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, but only father, mother, son, daughter. No brother, sister item. Okay? That's what Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is doing differently than Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says any immediate plus any second. So in other words, let's say you have a brother, and the brother is sitting shiva for his wife or for his son. According to Rabbi Akiva, you'd be in on that.
Yeah.
Okay? Comes along the Chachamim, and the Chachamim say, anyone that you would sit shiva for, if they're sitting shiva, you sit shiva. Ask the Gemara, what are you talking about? Chachamim, Ainu Tanakama. Turns out that effectively what the Chachamim are saying is exactly the same as Tanakama as Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara answers, genius. Ikabinaya. What's the difference between them? Imo babayit. If they're together in the house. Let's go back for 1 second before we move forward. Let's go back and see how the Gemara figured out this answer. Because it seemed like they're saying the same thing. Chachamim omrim, see, third line from the bottom. Chachamim omrim, kol shemit'abel alav, anyone you would sit shiva for, mit'abel imo.
Imo.
You sit shiva imo with him. We thought that meant, same like Rabbi Akiva, whoever he's sitting shiva for, you sit shiva with him. Says the Gemara, no, with him means literally with him. So in other words, let's say a person has an immediate relative that's sitting shiva. When I'm in the house with the guy, I hold the objects of mourning.
You meaning you're living with him?
Yeah, no, or even if I'm in the shiva house. So bar minan, a person has a brother who's sitting shiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, that would be intermediate. Sitting for a secondary. You walk in, you take off your shoes.
Oh, it's temporal.
It's imo only when you're with him. So the word imo could have meant that whatever he's doing, you do, and then it's Rabbi Akiva.
With him.
Comes the Gemara and says, no, with him doesn't mean with him. With him means with him. And I love that when you see the Gemara is really pulling it apart. Okay. Just like Rav said to his son Chia. And just like Rav Huna said to his son Rabba. In each case, their wife was sitting Shiva for someone that she lost. Ya'ani, her father, her mother. Be'apah nahug aviluta. When you're in front of her, so when you're with her, then you should be sit Shiva Ya'ani with her. Nahog, do the customs of avilut. Below apa, when you're not with her, lo tenag aviluta, you have no obligation to sit Shiva for her secondary.
With her, you sit Shiva,
Doesn't
you
even
go
have
to
to be
work,
living.
you go to work.
No, exactly, no Shiva. Only in front of her. Now, there's a question, by the way. For me, no problem. Because when I'm not with,
You don't shave when you're with them.
no, but when you're not with, you're good. Okay? Now, hold on a second. I want to point this out because this concept, velo apa lo tinhag aveluta, what is that? What is this minhag now? Are you a avel?
No.
Would you describe this as avelut?
No.
What would you describe it as?
Respect.
Oh, so just like we saw ripping the clothing after the Shiva is over for the parent, it's over. What am I ripping for? Answer is out of respect. Over here also, it's out of kavod, out of respect. Says the Gemara, Mar Ukva shachiv le bar Hamua. Mar Ukva, his bar Hamua, meaning the son of his mother-in-law. Who's the son of his mother-in-law? Brother-in-law. Okay? Passed away. Sava lemetav ale shiva u'shloshim. He thought that he should sit regular 7 days and 30 days, like you would have a regular case of shiva. Al Rav Huna legabe ashkech. Rav Huna came and he saw him sitting shiva, right, or planning to sit shiva for his brother-in-law. Okay, Amale tzudanaita beit lemechal. What are you craving the mourner's meal? What are you doing? Lo amiru l'chvod ishto ela chami v'chamoto. When we said a person should be do avelut for their wife out of kavod, who was that for? For her mother or her father, not for any of her relatives. So here, what was it to her? It was her brother. There's no shiva for your wife's brother. Okay, that's what the Ravuna says to Mar Ukva.
That would be the brother.
Lo amru l'chvod ishto ela hamiv v'chamoto, mother-in-law and father-in-law. Comes Ravuna and says, hold on, let's prove this concept. Tanya, we have one brighter that says, if a person's father-in-law, mother-in-law passed away, he can't force his wife to put on makeup, whether it's kochelet is for the eye, like eyes, and the other one, poseket is to color the cheeks. Okay. Rather, he turns over his bed, which we said a while ago is this concept. We don't do anymore, but that was a sign of avelut. He would turn the bed over. And he behaves with her with avelut. Also for her, when her father-in-law, i.e., the man's father, the man's mother, passes away, she does not get put on makeup during that time. Rather, she turns over her bed. And she practices avelut together with her husband. Okay? Vitanya, so that's one braita. Then we found another braita. Vitanya idach, another braita said, even though a man can't force his wife during her avelut to wear makeup, right? Be'emet ameru mozeget lo etakos. Still, she pours wine for him and mixes it with the water. Umatzat lo mita, and she prepares. She puts on the sheets for his bed. And she could still wash his hands, his feet, his face, right? So the Gemara is realizing, 1 second, didn't we just say that a person for his wife has the concept of mourning, and we imagine that would have been that he can't, the bed is going to be turned over. So why is she making the bed? He's not allowed to wash. So why is she washing for him? Okay?
She's mourning.
Sorry?
She's in mourning.
She's
washing him.
But she's doing his bed for him. If we said that he has to turn over his bed, there's no making his bed. If we said that he has to behave with mourning, no heget ima avelut, then he's not washing. So it comes out, according to this, right? You see, one place it says yes, one place it says no. Kashina hadadi, the Braitot are contradicting one another. Answer the Gemara. What do we learn from here? When we said that he behaves as a mourner because of her, so then what do? Then the halacha is, then he acts with mourning with his wife because it's her mother-in-law, it's her father-in-law. But here, in the case where it is a random relative of hers, brother, her sister, whatever case might be, there's no halakha that the husband would observe the mourning.
What happened to the bed concept? What did it die away? Like,
what do you mean?
Really said turning over the bed.
Yeah.
They use it as a real regular thing.
We had a load of them. You don't remember?
I do.
Pulling the thing all the way down over the eyes, the hat.
Where did that go?
Wearing only black clothes.
Where did the bed thing
At a certain time, they realized that wasn't an element of mourning.
So it became an evolved as a minhag thing, like? No, but it evolved. As time went on, the rabbis just got away from that.
I remember that when we first learned this, we talked about the idea that the mattresses at the time were made in a certain way that turning it over made it like it was uncomfortable. For us, a mattress this way, that way makes no difference.
From that perspective.
Yeah. Or when it's up on an item, when it's up on a bed, when it's up on legs, you flip the mattress. What'd you do? Nothing. Right? So at that point, we talked about that idea, about certain things not going. We're going to have one other example of this, by the way, just in this halakha.
So
we just talked about the idea that a person has an obligation to sit for a secondary relative.
Yes. When you're with them.
You ever heard of such a thing like that in your life?
No.
People sitting shiva for a grandfather? For a grandson? Never. What happened? The answer is, as we said, this mitzvah is really for what? Out of kavod. That means that if the person says to you, listen, I know it's for my kavod, I can't see you sitting mourning. Don't do it. He's allowed to tell the person, I don't want you to do it. And then you don't have to do it. So the default became, we assume that no one's going to want their relative to sit shiva just for their kavod. Now, could you understand as well that was a cultural thing? Back then, where the kavod of a family, of a grandfather was held in such high regard, parents wanted their children to sit shiva for the grandfather. Right? So that no longer is that the case. Okay? Says the Gemara, Shma Mina.
So they're really saying that if somebody really felt psychologically very close to that person and he wanted to give the kavod, and you even said to him, thank you, but I don't want you to sit with me, it's not,
Yeah.
And you really took it upon yourself to feel internally that you wanted to do it, you could do it.
Yes, but you would not be obligated to do it.
Yes, no.
If the person is demanding the kavod, we see here that he earned that you owe it to him.
Yes.
But if the person is not, or in a case where we have no information, we automatically assume that the person would not want it. So that's why we let you off the hook. Okay?
You're off the hook, but
We let you off the hook. Yes. Okay. Says the Gemara, Shma Mina. You're coming right in the laws of we're talking about Avelut, Majnun. Right? Baruch Hashem, and I just got to see your wife and your daughters. Crazy item right there. She wanted to tell me that you were coming, and I needed someone to drive my car. Literally, we each needed each other. Hashem brought us, like we saw in the Gemara in Ta'anit. He brought them both to one place and one time. It was remarkable. Hashem should bring you comfort, Be'ezrat Hashem, inshallah. Okay. Shma Mina, says the Gemara, so therefore, we understand from here that there's a distinction, that there's a difference between the father and mother of a spouse versus the other kirovim, the other relations of a spouse where there would be no such halacha of a secondary item. Says the Gemara, we found an exact braita that says exactly what we needed to say. We learned the braita that says, Lo amru l'chbod ishto, ella chami v'chamoto bilvad. We only said this halacha with regards to a person's honoring his wife by sitting shiva with her for her loss, only by her father or her mother. That's the only case, no other case. Amemar shachiv le barbere. We had the scenario where Amemar, his barbere, his son died. So who is that? Son of his son? Grandson. Kara ilave. He ripped his begadim over his grandson. He did kiryah. Atabere, his son came. Kara be'apeh. he ripped again. So his son should see that he was ripping. Itkar dim yushiv kara. He then remembered, right, that he ripped while he was sitting. And the halakha is that a person is supposed to tear while they're standing. Kam kara me'omad. He ripped a third time. Now he ripped while he was standing a third time. Okay? The Gemara says, Amne Rav Ashi Lamemar. Rav Ashi said to Amemar, Kiri'ah de me'omad minalan. Where do we know that when a person tears for avelut, they have to tear while they're standing? Dichtiv, because it says, Vayakom Iyov, vayikra et mi'ilo. And Iyov stood up and he tore his coat. So you see from the fact the Pasuk said that Iyov stood before he tore, that there's an obligation, to stand before. I mean, I don't know why it's shocking it would be a Torah. Where else would it be? Quran?
No, but I mean, it supersedes everything.
Iyov's not Torah.
Oh, Tanakh.
Iyov is Tanakh.
Yeah, okay.
So Iyov says he stood up and he tore. Illustrate. You like that one? Illustrating that he tore.
It's the same Franco joke. It's the same Franco. This is Minyan's for the Quran.
He tore only standing. Yeah. And not only that, what's interesting is, right, this is very interesting because where did you see that? Maybe Iyov stood and he ripped, because that's the better way to do it. Who said that if a person didn't stand before he ripped, he has to do it again?
But doesn't somebody
all you see in the pasuk is he did it in the ideal way, huh?
Somebody rips it for you, right? You don't rip it.
No.
You help them.
Usually what they're doing with that is they're only starting, because it's very hard. And the rest of it has to be done by hand.
You do it,
right? So they tear it across the item. If the person did not need the help, you could do it yourself. Okay? Not you, someone. Says the Gemara, Ele me'ata. Just want to lay down the law. Now get on the recording. Anytime I say you, I don't mean you. For all the future times. Like we say in Kal Nidre, not this year, not next year. I never mean you, I never mean me. I'm just using the colloquial you or me. It should not be a bar minan, an expression on any of us. Ele me'ata, says the Gemara. If that's the case, okay? Ve'amad ve'amar lo chafatzti lekachta achinami. So anytime you're going to tell me, anytime the pasuk says, and he stood and he, whatever follows next could only be done standing? You just told me because it says he stood and he tore his coat. That means you have to stand when you're tearing. So you're telling me that's the halakha? Anytime it says, and he stood and he did whatever the mitzvah was, that means that the mitzvah is only going to be ba'amidah. In the case of chalitza, what's the case of chalitza? You have a person, he's married to a man. He's not married to a man. No, that's the Quran also. Guy is married, he's married to a woman, okay? Anyway, the guy has no children, the husband dies. What's the halakha? She falls as a yibama, to that man's brother, okay? The brother marries her, they have a child, they name the child after the brother. And that way they keep his name and his legacy alive in this world. So the pasuk says, what does a person do if they're not going to marry her? So you have two options. One option is called yibum, that's the marrying of that woman. The other option is the guy's like, look, I can't marry her, I don't know, she's this, she's that, I don't have enough money for two wives, whatever the reason is. He says, I don't want to marry her, look, I can't take her. That's called chalitza. And then he takes off the shoe, spits, the whole item, right? And that releases her. She's then able to marry whomever she wants. The pasuk over there says, "Ve'amad ve'amar lo chafatzti lekachta," and he stands up and he says, "I do not wish to take her." So does that mean that whenever a person is doing chalitza, they need to stand?
Oh, you mean applying it not every?
That's the Gemara's question. Is that what you mean to tell me? Anytime you say, the Torah says, or the Navi says, and he stood, that means it's obligated to stand? What about the case of Chalitza? Also it says, and he stood, and he says, I don't want to take her. Okay? That's, I think, just because he's getting a head start on running. Tanya, the Braita says, Ben Yoshev, Ben Omed, Ben Muta. When a guy does Chalitza, he's allowed to stand, he's allowed to sit, he's allowed to lie down, although a little bit disrespectful. He's like, I don't want her. He don't even sit up to reject her. He's a lying piece of garbage, quite literally. Standing or leaning. Sorry? So you could say the question. No, that's not the question. The question is, I have a Braita that says you don't have to stand. I have a pasuk that says, and he stood. Evidently, when you find in the pasuk that it says, and he stood and he, it doesn't mean that you have to. That's the Gemara's question. from the Braita of Chalitza, that you're allowed to be lying or sitting, right? To the pasuk that we quoted in Chalitza. So therefore, one would imagine that that's also the case of what's it called? Of kiryah, of tearing the clothing. Amaleh, Amema said to him, no. What we learned this whole idea, where did we get it from? Amema stood and he tore. Where did he learn that from? From Eob. And it says, Amema, no. Don't touch my pasuk in Eob. Hatan lo kitiv vayamod vayomer. It doesn't say over there, and he stood, and he said, Hacha kitiv vayakom vayikara. In this case, it says, ve'amad ve'amar. And the man stood up and he said. But it does not say, vayakom vayikara. And he stood up and he tore. Now, what's the difference between these two cases? What's the difference between these two cases?
Eob and the other guy?
Yeah.
In the Chalitza?
Yeah. What's the difference between the two cases?
The other one is figurative, or?
Where do you see that in the expression? Amemar is trying to answer that these two pesukim are not the same. He says over there it doesn't say vayakom vayomer. It says ve'amad ve'amar. What's the difference? Why is it not the same? Okay, so let's take a look. Chachamim explain. Here we go. Hatam lo ketiv. You see this? Top Rashi and a little side item there. See that little side guy? Ela, in the case of Chalitza, Dibra Torah Kilashon Bnei Adam. We just spoke in a colloquial term.
Rashi, this one?
Rashi Ktav Yad, yeah? You see it? Ve'amad ve'amar ve'leka le'mishma ve'lo midi. Over here it's just saying, and the guy stood up and he said, not vayakom. Vayakom is like an active verb. And he did this, and he did that. As opposed to, the Torah is saying, what if the guy doesn't want? And he stands up and he says, it's more the normal way of talking. So Amemar says, you can't compare the case of Chalitza, where it doesn't obligate you to stand, to the case of Avelut, where Vayakom Vayikara obligates you to stand. The Gemara brings another example of this. Amarav Bachama, Minayin leKiriyah shemeumad. How do we know that Kiriyah is meumad while a guy is standing? Shneimar Vayakom Eov Vayikara. And Eov stood up and he tore. Okay, so the scenario over here is, again, it's a story of a specific person, and this is what he did. As opposed to, in the case of Ve'amad Ve'amar, we're just talking about colloquially, to people in general, and then the person will say, or the person will stand, but it's not obligatory. Okay? Says the Gemara, Dilma milta yitirta hu da'avad. 1 second. You're telling me, because it was about a single person, this is what Eov did. Vayamo, he got up, Vayakom, Vayikara. Dilma milta yitirta hu da'avad. Who said, I hear that you're saying that it's specific, but who said it's obligatory? Maybe he did something extra. Like I asked you in the beginning. He stood up, doesn't mean you're obligated to do so. It's a nice way of doing it. Dilo temachi, if you're not going to say this, say it like this. Vayagos et rosho hachinami. Later on it says that he was pulling hair from his head in anguish. Would you also say that there's an obligation for a person to tear out your hair in mourning? In fact, what do we learn? Can't the opposite. So the same way it says Vayakom Vayikara, it also says Vayagos, and he ripped out his hair. So you're gonna, who said just because he did it means that that's the law? Okay, maybe that was something done out of mourning or out of excess of anger or sadness. The Gemara continues and says, you know what, you're right. There must be another place where we can prove this from. From here. And the king stood up and he tore his clothes. Let's see the full pasuk. The full pasuk is here on the side. You see it over here.
Where are we in now? It's still in Tanakh with this?
Yeah, in Shemuel. You see over here, third pasuk, Gimel on the side. Vayakom HaMelech v'yikara et begadav, and the king stood up and he tore his clothes. Vayishkav ha'atz, and he lied down on the ground. V'chol avadav nitzavim, and all of his servants stood up kiru'e begadim. All of them were standing there with their clothing torn. Okay, all his servants as well. Who are we referring to over here in Shemuel? Okay, we're talking about David HaMelech, right? When he found out that they killed Avshalom, so he was tremendously distraught. The pasuk says he's walking through the streets singing, saying, "Beni, Beni, my son, Avshalom, Beni, Beni. If only I could die instead of you." He says, "Beni, Beni, my son," 7 times, and Avshalom is trying to kill him. He's the one who led the rebellion and the mutiny against him. Still, father for his son. He had that mercy. So the Gemara over here says that the king stood up and he ripped his clothes. Why is this any better? Tell me the same thing. Who says that that's a law? Maybe that's just what he did. And he went above and beyond because he was so sad. If you're not going to say that, when he lied down on the ground, if you're going to learn from him standing, right after that it says he lied down on the ground. You ever heard of halakha that a person stands up, rips his clothes, lies down on the ground? No. So if that's the case, just like that's not halakha, this is also not halakha. Okay? V'atanya, the Braita says, right? Yashen al gabe mita, al gabe kise, al gabe udaini gedola mikulan. Okay? So let's say we're talking about a scenario where the person is now in mourning, and we know there's a halakha to overturn the bed, but he doesn't overturn the bed. So instead, what does he do? He sleeps on a regular bed without a mattress. Or he sleeps on a chair. Or he sleeps on a big piece of mortar, okay, of like a cement, okay? Or if he sleeps even on the ground, al gabe kaka, lo yatsa yidei chovato, he did not fulfill his obligation of, what's it called? Of mourning. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan says, shelo kiyem kfiyat hamita, because even though you slept in an uncomfortable way, there's a mitzvah of avelut to overturn the bed. You didn't overturn the bed. You did all these other uncomfortable sleeping positions. You did not fulfill the mitzvah of kifiyat hamita. So what do you see from here? You see that King David, when he slept on the floor, was he doing what an Avel is supposed to do? No. So therefore, if you're not going to learn from Vayishkav, don't learn. Yeah. Amaleh, he said, Ke'en arza. No, doesn't mean that David HaMelech, Vayishkav arza, he slept on the floor. Rather, it means it was as if he slept on the floor. Like we said earlier, the bed, when it's turned over, it doesn't lose its comfort. So we gotta go up. Uli, yeah, we're late. So therefore, Vayishkav arza is the halacha. So therefore, also the Vayakom is also the halacha. We're going to end here on 21a1. Just by the way, it's so funny because if I was writing the Pirush on the Gemara, you know what I would say? You know why we have a proof from David HaMelech?